Welcome to the Disaster Resilience Planning for Heritage Resources video series. This video is the second installment in a 4-part series to guide developing a disaster resilience plan for heritage resources in your community. The intent is to provide resources for you, the heritage organization, the city planners or other local government officials, or even just the concerned resident to make a disaster resilience plan for your community. In this video, you will learn about a cultural resilience framework and how to apply this framework to disaster planning for heritage resources. This video will walk you through several examples from our project in Cottage Grove. A framework provides guidance for how to approach creating a plan. You can think of a framework as a methodology or a roadmap that provides direction on how to approach cultural resilience planning. The framework provides ways of thinking, ideas of what to look for, and describes a process of gathering information when looking at what risks heritage resources face. Our cultural resilience framework integrates best practices from disaster planning and cultural resource planning and consists of 3 parts. Each part provides a way to guide your approach to disaster planning. 1. Resilience principles. 2. Diversity, equity, and inclusion practices. And 3. The emergency management cycle. Resilience is the ability to anticipate, adapt, respond, and recover to unexpected change. Diversity, equity, and inclusion works to include people of many different identities to promote fairness and justness. And the emergency management cycle, which outlines the 4 phases of disaster events as mitigation, preparation, response, and recovery from disaster. Each phase focuses on specific types of action that work to manage or reduce the risks of disaster before, during, or after an event. For more in-depth discussion of these 3 parts, please refer to the guidebook for more information. When confronted with the risks that face heritage resources and the desire to make a disaster plan, you can use the cultural resilience framework to approach the planning process. Guided by new ways to approach disaster planning, your community or organization can produce a plan that works to lessen the risk of damage or loss of heritage resources, strengthen communication across partners such as heritage organization, city or council staff, and emergency management personnel, while broadening participation within cultural heritage planning to represent the entire history of a place and its community. In short, disaster planning can have benefits beyond preparing you for disasters. Disaster resilience planning for heritage resources is far from an individual effort. Forming a working group to tackle the planning process should include representation from a diverse group of individuals or organizations. If you are creating a community-wide plan, your working group could include representatives from heritage organizations, local tribe partners, multicultural organizations, members from relevant city or county commissions or departments, business owners operating within historic buildings, or general members of the public. If you're creating an organizational plan, the board should appoint a subcommittee to work through the planning process. Members of this subcommittee should represent individuals with a diversity of skills, expertise, and experience. To ensure diversity in representation, members of the subcommittee should work towards the engagement of their volunteer base and the wider community that they are a part of. Now that we've learned the basics of the framework and have a team to work with through the plan, let's look at how to start applying the framework. An example. The National Museum in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, experienced a devastating fire in 2018. This fire was caused by an outdated air conditioning system which had never been renovated in its 200-year history. The building also lacked working sprinkler systems, fire alarms, and fire doors to prevent the spread. Millions of unique and irreplaceable items were lost, including scientific specimens stored for future study, and artifacts priceless to culture and history, such as recordings of South American indigenous languages that are no longer spoken. Many heritage resources were never digitized due to lack of stable funding, so that any artifacts that were not lost had no record of what they were. If we were to apply a cultural resilience framework to this example for disaster planning, we would first identify the risk. What heritage resources are at risk to damage or complete loss in the event of building fire? Using the resilience framework, we would ask, what systems can we use to anticipate, adapt, respond to, and recover from a building fire? A sprinkler system, fire alarms, and fire doors would have provided multiple ways to reduce the damage and loss of heritage resources by having several parts which can respond to a building fire, even if one of those parts were to fail. Explore opportunities to incorporate diversity, equity, and inclusion practices. Are there diverse perspectives and backgrounds that can inform decision-making around disaster resilience? Could partnerships with Indigenous groups have informed how to protect recordings? How might DEI practices inform prioritization of resources? And finally, emergency management. What actions can be identified to mitigate, prepare for, respond to, and recover from a building fire? Renovations to the museum building may have mitigated the risk of fire from outdated air conditioner altogether. Next, we present an example that shows how this framework can be applied to heritage resources for communities in Oregon. This example is from the Cottage Grove Heritage Resources Plan. Through our engagement with the heritage organizations, we found that much of the knowledge about how things are done in small nonprofit organizations are known from experience, and few procedural things are written down. Volunteers from these organizations have given years of service to preserve and share heritage resources, gaining the knowledge about how things are done from experience over time. The risk this poses is that there are few formal procedures for how to deal with or respond to emergency or disaster events. This can lead to lengthened reaction times during disaster events because it is not clear who to contact, who can make decisions about what to do, or where the supplies are located, such as a first aid kit or fire extinguisher. By applying resilience, we can begin to ask how to improve information sharing about disaster response across volunteers, staff, and board members. What procedures can be created that would empower anyone associated with the organization to react to a disaster situation? How can this information be accessible to anyone who needs to think on the fly without having to first contact staff member or board president? Incorporating diversity, equity, and inclusion practices asks whose perspectives are needed to shape new procedures. Volunteers, staff, and board members may represent a wide variety of identities and perspectives that could inform disaster response procedures. For example, procedures may need to be available in multiple languages or be accessible to individuals of multiple abilities. Applying emergency management practices, how can a procedure incorporate all 4 emergency management phases to mitigate, prepare, respond, and recover from a disaster? What knowledge exists among your heritage organization that just by sharing may reduce risks of disasters from even occurring? How can you take your knowledge from how the organization has reacted to events in the past and incorporate that knowledge to prepare everyone to respond? Volunteers not only hold a lot of knowledge about how things are run at their organizations, they also perform many duties that support the organization's mission, such as preservation activities or educational programs. We found that although these volunteers are dedicated, they're often a small group of individuals. With a small volunteer base, heritage organizations have limited abilities to digitize resources, which may be unique and irreplaceable. This poses a risk to those heritage resources of being subject to damage or complete loss in the event of a disaster. Having digitized resources or catalogs of heritage resources can support recovery efforts if items have been separated from the record of what they were. By applying our resilience framework, we can start to ask, are there new ways of learning how to digitize that can streamline the process for volunteers? Are there skills around digitizing that everyone can be encouraged to learn that can increase capacity for digitizing? Can we increase the resilience of digital copies that do exist by storing them in separate location from the physical assets themselves, or even better, on a secure online platform like Google or Dropbox? Incorporating diversity, equity, and inclusion practices, we can ask, can we recruit volunteers from outside our existing network, such as community youth members who may have tech-savvy skills to contribute and transferable job skills to gain? Additionally, it's important to ask if the resources at risk of loss represent the heritage of underrepresented groups. This may inform priority of which items are digitized first, spur new ideas about preservation practices, or encourage seeking out new partnerships. From an emergency management perspective, digitizing resources and online storage can mitigate the impacts of disaster events. Online and digital backups of physical assets can aid in recovery efforts through digitized catalogs that connect the heritage resources with relevant information that may only exist as exhibit material or informational placards. A cultural resilience framework works to provide you with guidance for how to ask questions about disaster resilience questions through 3 perspectives: resilience, diversity, equity, and inclusion practices, and emergency management. This framework works to integrate best practices of disaster planning with cultural resource planning in order for you to create a plan that decreases or mitigates the risk of damage or loss of heritage resources, strengthens communications across partners such as heritage organizations, city or county staff, and emergency management personnel, and broaden participation to represent the entire history of a place and its community. In the next video, you will learn how to collect data about the risks and hazards that face heritage resources and techniques for engagement with project partners and community members in the planning process. This project was a result of a partnership between the University of Oregon's Institute for Policy Research and Engagement, All-Star Heritage Community of Cottage Grove, Oregon Heritage Program staff, and City of Cottage Grove staff. If you would like more information about this project or how to create a disaster resilience plan for heritage resources in your community, please go to the Oregon Heritage website to download the complete guidebook. We hope this helps you in your community develop strategies to protect your heritage resources.